Welcome back to Funding Fundamentals, CWELCC Cost-Based Funding Explained, the podcast where we demystify the Canada-wide early learning and childcare cost-based funding, one episode at a time. I'm Ashley McMillan, your host, here to guide you through the complexities of funding and what it all means for childcare providers. But here's the twist. Our special guests, who will help us demystify these topics, they aren't human. They are AI-generated voices with a knack for breaking things down, crushing the numbers, and maybe even throwing in a little digital wit. This limited series is here to make funding fundamentals clear. So let's decode CWELCC with the help of voices that never get tired. Let's hear from our special guests.
Welcome back to the deep dive. We're tackling something pretty complex, but honestly, really crucial.
Childcare funding. Specifically, we're looking at the sources you shared to figure out why funding looks so different for home-based versus center-based care.
Exactly. That's our mission today, unpacking the why. And, right off the bat, what really jumps out from your material is the central idea,
Which is?
That the funding formulas are different for a reason. It's not random. It seems to be fundamentally about, the different structures, how these programs actually run day to day.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So let's unpack that first piece then. Home Childcare HCC. The source material says its funding is built around something called the active home day.
An active home day, like just a day the home is actually open and providing care.
Pretty much, yeah. It's the number of days a specific home is actively doing its thing. So the funding bits for HCC are tied right to that measure.
Okay, so what are those bits?
Well, your sources detail a few key ones. There's compensation for the provider themselves, a certain amount per active home day.
Right.
Then there's a fixed amount, like per year, given to the agency that supports these homes.
Okay. So that recognizes the agency's overhead, their operational costs for supporting that network of homes. Because the home isn't just floating out there alone, all right?
Exactly. It's part of a system. And you see that support reflected again in another funding piece, visitor compensation.
For the home visitors from the agency?
Yep. Also calculated per active home day, plus a little extra, like 5% for related costs. And finally, there's a component for variable costs, again, tied to that active home day. What's kind of neat is how these specific numbers in the source, they sort of tell a story, They reflect the unique costs of running care in a home, but with that agency support layer, including those visitors.
That really does make sense. It's tailored to that specific way of operating. So how does that stack up against center-based care? Let's shift gears to CBC.
Okay, so if we look at the center model, the structure changes quite a bit, and the funding formula pivots right along with it. For CBC funding, your sources say it's based on operating space days.
Operating space days, so not the home being active, but the number of licensed spaces being used each day.
That's the one. And this is where it gets really interesting and definitely more granular.
Granular how?
CBC funding isn't just based on the space. It's often broken down further by age group. And even by the center's location sometimes.
Wow, okay, broken down by age group. What does that actually look like in the numbers?
Well, take program staffing, for instance. It varies hugely. Your source shows it could be like upwards of $90 per day for infants.
Which makes sense. You need way more staff for babies.
Totally. High staff-to-child ratios there. But then it drops down to maybe around $15 a day for kindergarten-age kids, where the ratios are different.
That huge swing really underlines the staffing intensity for the little ones. What about other costs? Things you'd see in centers, but maybe not so much in home care.
Yeah, a key difference the sources point out. Supervisors, the data mentions a figure for supervisor allocation.
Okay, because centers usually have a dedicated supervisor actually in the building, right?
Sure.
Whereas the home model leans more on that agency support structure and the visitors.
Exactly. It directly funds that distinct role.
Yeah.
$301.38 per center per service day. Sounds pretty standard.
It does sound standard, but here's a really crucial detail. There's actually a scaling factor that gets applied.
A scaling factor? How does that work?
It's based on the age groups the center actually serves. So that $301, it gets adjusted depending on the mix of kids.
Okay. So they might not get the full $301 allocated.
Potentially, yes.
And accommodation funding, the cost of the building space, that also gets way more detailed for centers. It can vary by age group and whether the center is in, say, a community building versus a public school.
Right. Different overheads there.
For sure. And general operations costs, both fixed and variable, they're calculated per licensed space day in the center model. So all this detail, the supervisor funding, the specific accommodation costs, it just reflects the typically higher overhead and just different operational footprint of a center compared to someone's home.
Okay. So let's try putting them side by side for a second, just based on the snapshot from your source material. What are the really stark differences in how these costs are handled?
Absolutely. Let's do a quick comparison. The big picture is, like you said, they're funding similar types of things: staff, operations, space.
But how they calculate it is totally different.
Totally. Staffing per active home day in HCC. But for CBC, it's per space day and sliced and diced by age group.
And that supervisor role gets its own funding line in CBC, but it's kind of not applicable for HCC because they use that agency visitor model instead.
Right. Accommodations. Super detailed for CBC, based on space type and location. The HCC summary we have doesn't break it down like that.
And visitor compensation is only in HCC, reflecting that agency structure. It doesn't show up for CBC.
Correct. And even basic operations costs are handled differently. HCC gets that annual lump sum per agency. CBC calculates it per licensed space day.
Though it is interesting that your source mentions the way they handle profit or surplus calculation is actually the same for both.
Yeah, that is interesting. Which kind of brings us back full circle to that core point.
That the underlying principles might be the same, but the formulas get tweaked.
Exactly. They're deliberately tailored. They have to be, right? To reflect how different these two models really are, structurally and operationally. Home-based versus center-based. The goal, it seems from the source, is fairness and flexibility within those different structures.
So translating this for you, the listener, there's a really good quick tip we can pull straight from this material.
Which is?
When you're looking at your own funding notice, whether you run a home program or manage a center, remember that the numbers you see, they are directly tied to your specific structure.
Yeah, it's not just like a simple per kid calculation across the board.
Mm-hmm.
It's about these specific costs and roles built into the way your program works, captured by things like active home days or operating space days and all those little component breakdowns.
Right. It's about the how.
And, thinking about how detailed this funding gets, how closely it seems tied to the operational structure and capacity, it does make you wonder about something else.
Oh, what's that?
Well, your source material dives deep into funding based on, capacity, daily operations.
Those space days and active home days we just talked about?
Exactly. But then it mentions other possible funding pieces.
Yeah.
It specifically names this legacy top-up.
Okay.
And the source explicitly states that that particular funding is not about how many children you care for, which implies it's also not tied directly to those daily operational metrics we just unpacked.
Huh. So if some funding isn't based on the number of kids or the detailed structural costs like staffing ratios or space usage, what else could be driving parts of these funding models? What other factors might be in the mix beyond just daily operations or capacity?
It kind of suggests there are more layers here, right?
Yeah.
More to understanding these allocations than just the straightforward per child or per space math. Your source material actually hints that we might get into that legacy top-up next time.
Interesting. So definitely more to uncover in this whole childcare funding puzzle.
That's it for this episode of Funding Fundamentals, CWELCC Explained. I hope you found today's discussion insightful and that it helps you navigate the complexities of Canada's early learning and childcare system with confidence. If you have any questions, thoughts, or topics you'd like us to explore, feel free to reach out. Stay tuned for more episodes where we'll continue breaking down funding in a way that's clear and accessible. Until next time, I'm Ashley McMullen, and thanks for listening.